With most bank accounts, the account holder is trying their best to deposit more than they withdraw, right? Well, there's one bank that really works in the opposite way, and that's the Weed Seed Bank of America. The long-term goal for any farmer, but especially organic farmers with limited tools and rescue treatments, is to maximize the withdrawals of weeds and their seeds and minimize the deposits. It's a bank that we want to be robbed, leaving as few seeds in the soil as possible. Mining that seed bank is a long-term and really incremental process. First, prioritize minimizing the number of weeds that go to seed in the first place. I know that's obvious, but too often weed escapes are shrugged off as a better luck next year kind of thing. And they're going to be ghosts that come back to haunt a farmer year after year. By controlling germinated but still vegetative weeds, you're eliminating the breeding stock from the system. Taking out weeds before viable seed is produced will eventually lead to fewer and fewer weeds in the seed bank, as the seeds already present germinate and are controlled. Now, perennial weeds can be more of a challenge. Their bank often includes two deposits, one seed and one rootstock that's an even more viable propagule. Canada thistle, my arch nemesis, is a great example. One study cut Canada thistle roots into pieces to see how big they would have to be to germinate, and found that a piece as tiny as 5 millimeters still had a 10% germination rate. Thistle control is a longer conversation, but suffice it to say, you're going to have to fight both that weed seed bank as well as the rootstock bank. The simple theory at work here is that over time, weeds can be disrupted beyond a sustainable replacement rate. They'll germinate, but they won't complete their reproductive cycle often enough to maintain significant pressure. However, this theory, like a lot of theories, is easier said than done. And some would say that you can't actually deplete the seed bank so much as try to slow the growth through minimizing opportunities for germination and doggedly trying to catch weeds before they go to seed. There are, as usual, lots of partially effective tools at the organic farmer's disposal that, when used in concert with each other, can result in a good long-term weed strategy. First, we'll start with the cultural controls and then end with the mechanical. We've mentioned stale seed bedding a couple of times already, and since it's the first important step in a long season of control measures, it bears repeating. Creating a stale seed bed is simply encouraging a flush of weeds and then terminating it before you get around to planting or cultivating or flaming. This creates as large a difference as possible between weeds and the crop. Stale seed bedding is the bedrock control that your season will be based on. Getting this right will likely make all of your jobs a little easier, but getting it wrong could be really disastrous. Good long-term control starts with the foundations of good short-term control. Next is my favorite, crop rotation. Another strategy that we've already talked quite a bit about. For many weeds, a diverse crop rotation will be the single greatest factor in their control. Different crop life cycles and the different field operations the crop requires to discourage weed proliferation and keep any one weed from becoming dominant. The importance of crop rotation cannot be overstated. In my experience, the longer a farmer has been organic, the longer the rotation becomes. They've seen the benefits and are maximizing them. The proof is in the pudding. The last strategy isn't so much a form of control as it is a general directive of all aspects of organic farming. Timely management. Doing things when they need to be done is as true on all farms, but especially true on organic farms because the margin of error can be much higher and the windows and tools we have are much smaller. Missing a cultivation window before a couple of weeks of rain can be fatal for the pocketbook. Planting too early will likely lead to a really expensive replant or a field that ends up being more weeds than crop. May, June, and July are the on-call months for weed control in the Midwest, and May especially in the West. When the window is right, a farmer will have to drop absolutely everything to get into that field and control those weeds. This has other implications as well. A field that's too far from the home farm to keep a good close eye on or to cultivate when the timing is just right just might not be the right field for transition. If a farmer is depending on a custom operator or sharing a piece of weed control equipment with a neighbor, they're not in total control of the field when the work schedule needs to be done. Let's jump into the mechanical control tools that can help a farmer achieve long-term weed control. We'll start with weed trimmers like the Meneguzzo. It's a weed trimmer using modular cutter bars to run over the top of the crop. It cuts would-be seed heads off before they can actually contribute to the seed rain that will be a regrettable deposit in that weed seed bank. It can be raised to over 4 feet above the ground, letting you top weeds well into the growing season. A similar machine that's built for small grains is the comb cut. It combs through the lower parts of the crop before the cash crop has put up a rigid stem or flag leaf. Because of the floppy structure of the crop at this stage, the comb cut passes through the blades and the stem of the rigid weeds like Canadian thistle are sliced off. It only needs about 60 horsepower to run and is height adjustable as well. I've used a comb cut on my own farm in my durum crop, and I found that in really heavy patches of thistle, it just doesn't get enough to really do a good job, but I also didn't have the chance to go multiple times in a season, which I think could have helped its efficacy. So the machines we've just mentioned are all meant to be used earlier in the season. But what about all those weeds that somehow, despite our best efforts, made it through to the combine? That's millions, maybe billions of seeds blowing right out the back of the combine and onto the ground, where they'll be patiently waiting to make next year's weeds. That's where a seed destructor comes in. So these aren't newfangled machines anymore, and companies like Harrington Seed Destructor or Seed Terminator have retrofit units for almost every equipment manufacturer. There are also pull-behind models if one of the retrofits just doesn't work for your operation. Dr. Adam Davis, the University of Illinois professor, has run trials on that piece of equipment for years and found that it can predictably reduce seed rain by 70 to 80%. He and other researchers have found that almost 100% of the seed coming out of the hammer mill isn't viable. So why the two numbers? Well, not all of the weed seeds will actually get into the mill. The header will shake off a percentage onto the ground during harvest. Regardless though, it's worth looking into as it's an incredible tool for the long-term fight to reduce weed pressure on your farm. The last piece of equipment you can use in the long-term fight against the weeds is probably one you have, a mower. Sickle bar, rotary cutter, flail chopper, whatever you have. It's a great way to keep your field edges clean. This will, in turn, keep those weed seeds from making their way into your fields, whether through in-season field operations or through the slow encroachment over many years. Most organic fields will look worse from the outside. Walk a little bit into the field, and they're probably looking okay. Exploit this fact to target a greater percentage of the weeds on the outside of the field, or on the edges, and control early and control often. Dr. Davis has a great caveat to keep in mind with any tool used to fight weeds. Whatever you do to control a weed will inevitably force that weed to adapt and evolve to get around that control. Talking about the seed destructor, he said, if producers start using this device on a large scale, they're ultimately going to start selecting for earlier shattering weeds. And that's already happening in Australia. That's just the nature of weed and pest management in general. Really, what you're doing is managing evolution. In order for any tactic to be successful, you've got to change it up a little bit. You need to confuse them, add diversity in that time of the year when their life stage is most vulnerable. We're just proposing this as a new tactic that's effective, not the only tactic. That caution relates to just about every tool in the toolbox. So we've touched on keeping weeds from emerging and what to do when they do emerge. These are really important practices and strategies to implement during the growing season, but they won't be effective and may not be enough if they're not paired with long-term strategies that trend your weed pressure downward as your management gets easier and easier year after year.